Hello folks, so welcome to chapter 19, a macroeconomic theory of the open economy.
Theory of open economy, we have some assumption. Economy's GDP is given. So the real GDP is determined by the factors of production and the available technology. The real GDP is the quantity of goods and services. That's only decided by these two stuff, right? The available technology, that's A. And for the other factors, that could be the capital, the human capital, the natural resources, and the labor force, something like this. So that will be decided by the real GDP. Economy's price level is given, so price level adjusted to bring the supply and demand for money into balance. Again, that's the chart we learned, or we mentioned in chapter 17. Again, that's the horizontal, is the quantity of money. Quantity of money. This is Y over P, is the value of money. And the right side is the price value, price level. So from the for the value from the bottom to the top, that's increase. But for the price level from the top to the bottom, that's increase. The demand curve, the money demand, that's the what's the quantity of money the household want to hold as liquid. And the the supply curve, the money supply, is decided by the fund. And the equilibrium, the intersection points, is decided by the supply and demand curve, and that's the price level or the value of money is decided. Alright? So this figure is important. The price level adjusted to bring the supply and demand in balance. The model we are going to learn today will highlight the forces that determines the economy's trade balance and the exchange rate. Remember, what is trade balance here? It's net exports. Since the net export equals to the net capital outflows, so that's the trade balance. And the exchange rate. The relationship between these two is the model we are going to learn today. So to investigate this model, we need to look something like looking simultaneously at two related markets. The markets for loanable funds. What is loanable funds? What we learned before. Another market for the loanable funds market. That's the loanable funds, the horizontal line, and the vertical axis is the real interest rate. The supply curve and demand curve. For the supply, it's steady. For the demand, it's the investment. That's the loanable funds market. We have supply curve and demand curve. The equilibrium, the intersection will tell us what's the real interest rate and what's the loanable funds market, this market needs and supply. So that's the market for loanable funds. And the last one is the market for foreign currency exchange. And this is the market we are going to learn today in this chapter. But before I want to write two equations, I want to remind you that for the net export equals to export minus imports. For net capital outflow, this is important in this chapter. It's equal to the purchases of foreign assets by domestic residents minus purchases of domestic assets. This equation is very important in both chapter 18, what we learned last week, and also in this chapter. The market for loanable funds in an open economy, S equals to I plus NCO, because in open economy, we assume that Nx is there, because in an open economy, we have exports and imports. But remember, in a closed economy, we assume that Nx equal to 0, which means S equals to I. This is closed economy, and this one is open economy. That's difference. So, which means the saving in an open economy equals to domestic investment plus the net capital outflow. So, which means in this figure here, the loanable funds in the closed economy, we assume that this D is the investment, and all the investment is I, right? So we assume in a closed economy, S equals to I. That's closed economy. But in the open economy, this I is not just the only investment in your domestic market. This investment equals to I, the domestic investment by the US or domestic residents, but also plus the net capital outflow. That's in the open economy. So which means in the open economy, the demand curve equals to I plus NCO is not I anymore, because S equals to I, that's closed economy. In this chapter, since we learned the open economy, so the demand curve in this chapter is not I anymore, but it's equal to I plus the net capital outflow. So this is important, and these are the difference between the closed economy and the open economy. The demand curve is different. Market for loanable funds. Before, no matter for closed economy or open economy, the supply of loanable funds are the same, just from the national saving as. Remember, national saving equals to S equals to Y minus T minus C plus T minus G. This is private saving, and that's public saving. That's the national saving. That's the supply curve for loanable funds. No matter for closed economy or open economy, always the same, no difference. But the demand for the loanable funds is different from the closed market, because in open market, the demand curve D includes both the domestic investment I, what we learned before, but also the net capital outflow NCO in open economy. So this is different. The net outflow of capital when NCO is bigger than 0, that means the net purchases of capital overseas will add to the demand for domestically generated for loanable funds. That's easier to understand. If you want to invest in other countries, of course you need more loanable funds from the domestic, and they use that amount of money transfer to the or exchange to the foreign currencies and they invest in other countries, right? Which means if you want to invest in other countries, you need more money to invest. And you need more, that means you demand more loanable funds. So that's what this sentence means. And the net inflow of capital when the NCO is smaller than zero. When the NCO is smaller than zero, which means the purchase of domestic assets by foreigners is bigger than the foreign assets holding by the domestic residents, right? So in this way, the capital resources coming from abroad that will reduce the demand for domestically generated loanable funds. For this one, it means other countries or foreigners are going to invest in your country, such as in the United States. And if other countries will invest in the United States, then the demand of domestic loanable funds will not that much because other peoples are going to invest here. So that's the definition of these two sentences. How NCO, net capital outflow, depends on the real interest rate. What's the relationship between R and the NCO? That's the new chart here. The horizontal is the NCO, the net capital outflow, and the vertical axis is the real interest rate. This is the real value, all right? That's the real interest rate. So the real interest rate R is the real return on domestic assets. If R decreases from R1 to R2, that makes the domestic asset less attractive relative to foreign asset. This is the real interest for domestic market, such as in the United States. If the real interest rate decreases, which means the returns for the United States bond will decrease, right? Which means the relative to the foreign bonds, like for the Mexican bonds, the interest rate is higher than the United States bonds. For no matter domestic, for Americans or for foreigners, compared with these two markets, of course, all the people want to invest in the Mexico because the returns, the interest rate is higher in Mexico. So, which means if the interest rate in the United States decrease, then for Americans, you are going to invest in other countries. So the net capital outflow is going to increase. R decrease, NCO will increase. That explains why the NCO, the relationship between R and the NCO is negative. So people in the United States purchase more foreign assets and people abroad is going to purchase fewer US assets and the NCO rises. Again, NCO equals to the purchases of foreign assets by domestic minus the purchases of domestic assets by foreigners. So this slide tells you why they are negative relationship. And again, this is the market, the loanable funds market for open market. And the difference is this one. That's the difference between the open market and the closed market. In the open market, the demand curve equals to I plus NCO. Because in the last in the last slide, we know that the relationship between R and the NCO is negative. And we also know that the relationship between R and I is negative. That's what we learned before, right? And since the demand curve in this one is I plus NCO, both of these are negative, so the total demand curve will also be negative here. So both I and the NCO depend negatively on R. So the D demand curve is downward sloping. And the R adjusted to balance the supply and demand curve in the loanable funds market. And again, this chart is for, if you see this one, that's for open economy. Suppose the government runs a budget deficit. Previously, the budget was balanced. Use the appropriate diagram to determine the effects on the real interest rate and the net capital outflow. So in the last slide, we know the relationship between R, the real interest rate, and the net capital outflow is negative. So what's the budget deficit? So remember the S, the national saving, equals to Y minus T minus C plus T minus G. And this is private, this is public, right? And for public, we know that the budget deficit is, which means the government spending is bigger than the test revenue. So this one is smaller than zero, or this one is decreased compared with budget deficit. If T minus G is decreased, which means the public saving is decreasing, and that will result a decreasing of national saving. If S decrease, so that's the R, loanable funds market, the S supply curve and demand curve equals to I plus NCO. If S decrease here because of the budget deficit, so the S is going to shift to the left-hand side. We will know that that will increase our R here. So that's what we can get. Suppose the government runs a budget deficit, we know the real interest rate increase. And if that happens, use the appropriate diagrams to determine the effects on the real interest rate and the net capital outflow. So for this question, will the net capital outflow increase or decrease if the interest rate increase? What we learned in the last slide, the relationship between the real interest rate and the NCO is negative, which means if R, that's the original R, and that's the original NCO. If because of the budget deficit, the real interest rate increase, which means the new NCO will decrease from this point to this point. That's the decreasing of NCO. So the result for this example question is decreasing. That's the two charts you need to draw. The first chart is the loanable funds market. What happens to the S or what happens to the D? And what's the result of the real interest rate? If you know what happens to the real interest rate, in the second diagram, you will know the NCO go up or go down. Budget deficit reduce saving and the supply of LF, so causing SR. And the higher interest rate makes US bonds more attractive relative to foreign bonds. That will reduce the NCO because no matter domestic residents or foreigners, they are going to invest in the US. So the net capital outflow will decrease. When working with this model, keep in mind the loanable funds market determines the real interest rate. So the R only determined by the loanable funds market, not depends on the others. And this real interest rate will decide your net capital outflow. The value of R determines the NCO in the red graph. So you should figure out the left graph first, and then to figure out the right graph. The next market is the foreign currency exchange market. That's the new market we are going to learn today, and this is the most important market in this chapter. The market for foreign currency exchange trade the US dollars in exchange for foreign currencies. And here in this market, we assume that this market is outside of the United States, which means you trade your US dollars for foreign currencies outside of the United States in other countries. So that's what happens outside of the US. That's the market for the foreign currency exchange market. We have identity NCO equals to net exports. Net exports is the demand for dollars. Foreigners need dollars to buy the US net exports. And the NCO is the supply of dollars. Remember the difference between the NS net exports and the NCO net capital outflow. The net exports is the goods and services. That's the goods market. We talk about I want to buy some stuff, I want to sell some stuff, I want to import some stuff. That's the trade market. That's the net export. We talk about goods. But when we talk about NCO, that's the asset. The asset held by the domestic residents or the asset held by foreigners. So these are two different markets. For the net exports, the goods need for the foreigners, they want to buy the goods from the US, so they need the US dollars to buy the goods from the US. So if they need the US dollars, that's a demand for the US dollar markets or the foreign exchange dollars. But for the NCO, that's the asset the people hold. And that's the money supply. The US residents need to sell dollars to obtain the foreign currencies they need to buy foreign assets. So if for the US residents, if you want to buy the foreign asset, you have to use US dollars to exchange the foreign currencies first. And if you want to change the foreign currencies, you have to give US dollar to others. So that's the money supply. The US real exchange rate here. I emphasize the real here. That measures the quantity of foreign goods and services that trade for 1 unit of US goods and services. The real exchange rate is not measured by dollars, as we learned before. It's not 1 US dollars could could exchange for how many amount of foreign currencies. We talk about the real value, it should be the quantity of foreign goods and services here. So, which means in this chapter, in this model, we cannot calculate the exchange rate by P star, the price of foreign price divided by the domestic price, because this is the limitation of the purchasing parity. Because there are some inflations happens. So we cannot use this to calculate the exchange rate. So the way we need to calculate the real exchange rate is use the quantity service and quantity of goods and services, something like that, right? So these are two different exchange rate. This is nominal exchange rate, but because of inflation, we do not use this. So when we calculate the real exchange rate, which we are going to learn in this chapter. E, the real value of a dollar in the market for foreign currency exchange. E balances the supply and demand in the market for foreign currency exchange. And remember, it's the trade US dollars for the market for foreign currency. We talk about dollars here. This diagram, this picture is the market for foreign currency exchange. An increase in E makes US goods more expensive to foreigners and reduce the quantity of dollars demanded by goods. Remember what we learned about appreciation and depreciation. E is the real exchange rate and responds to dollars. The exchange rate, it means the number there, it means if I use $1, how much foreign currencies I can exchange for. Which means if this E increase, it means if I use $1 US, I can exchange for more foreign currencies. And which means there is appreciation of US dollars. If E decrease, which means if I use $1 US, I can exchange for fewer or less of foreign currency compared with before, which means there is a depreciation of dollars. So the horizontal line is dollars because we talk about dollars in this chapter. So if E increase, if E go up, it means appreciate of dollars. If E goes down, it means depreciate of dollars. So here, if I increase in E, which means appreciate of dollars, which means the value of dollars increase. If the value of dollars increase, that means makes US goods more expensive to foreigners, and that will reduce the quantity of dollars demand to buy those goods. If dollars are more expensive, appreciate, then the US goods for the foreigners are more expensive. In that case, they prefer the cheaper stuff, so they do not want to buy the US goods compared with before. So which means if E increase, the demand or the net export for the United goods and services will decrease. That's the relationship between the exchange rate and the NX, the demand curve, net export. An increase in E has no effect on supply and on saving and investment. Remember, for saving and investment, that's the loanable fund market. Supply and demand. This is the domestic market. You can imagine yourself, when you want to invest in the United States, if you want to buy some bonds, if you want to buy some shares, the stocks, are you going to consider the exchange rate? No, you are not going to consider that. You're only going to consider what's the real interest rate in the United States, right? Only the real interest rate will influence your investment action in the United States. So which means the exchange rate, what's the exchange rate compared with euros and the US dollars, that will not influence your saving, your purchases or investment in the domestic market. So it doesn't affect the NCO. If R doesn't move, which means the relationship between R and the NCO doesn't change either. So the NCO will be constant. If R doesn't change, then NCO will not change. In that case, the supply of NCO will always be vertical. So E adjusts to balance the supply and demand for dollars in the market for foreign currency exchange. This picture is very important in this chapter, and you need to remember that demand curve is the net export. That's the foreigners need US dollars. That's their demand. Remember, this market is outside of the United States. The people, the foreigners need US dollars to buy US goods and services. So that's the demand for US dollars. That's the net export. The supply of dollars in the other countries, that's how much Americans want to use US dollars to invest in other countries. If you want to invest in other countries, you have to give them US dollars to exchange their foreign currencies and then invest them there. So that's the supply of US dollars outside of the United States. That's the NCO. All in all, NCO, that's the supply curve. That's the vertical line for the foreign exchange market. And the demand curve for the foreign exchange market, that's the net exports. So please remember this figure. Really, really important. Let's take a look at this example question. So a US mutual fund wants to buy a Japanese government bonds. How is this transaction affecting supply or demand in foreign exchange market? Well, this influence NCO or NX. That's the supply equals to NCO. That's the demand equals to net export. So if a US mutual fund wants to buy a Japanese government, will this influence NCO or influence NX? I have two equations here. One is for NX, exports minus imports, and another equation is NCO equals to purchase of foreign assets by domestic resident minus the purchase of domestic asset by foreigners. So according to this question, will it influence NCO or NX? Because US mutual funds wants to buy a Japanese government bonds, which means the US mutual funds have to use the US dollars to exchange in Japanese yen. So it supplies dollars in the market, and which also means the assets held by domestic residents, which is the US mutual fund, is going to increase, right? The purchase of foreign assets by domestic residents increase, then the NCO will increase. That means the net capital outflow will increase. That's the supply. So the supply of dollars increased by this transaction. That increase NCO, which we think of as the supply of dollars. If you want to invest in other countries, you have to give your dollars first and then invest in other countries. So the NCO is the net supply of dollars. So this question tells you why the NCO is supply. All right. Again, this is outside of the United States, the foreign currency exchange. What about this one? The Japanese airline needs to exchange its yen into dollars because the Japanese need to buy some stuff, right? The Boeing is the good, it's not an asset. So for good, that will influence the net export. If the Japanese airline needs to exchange its yen into dollars, so it demands dollars in the market for foreign currency exchange. The demand, so again, since it will influence the net export, it influences the demand. The demand is the net export. So demand for dollars will increase. The increase in exports increases net exports, which we think of as the demand for dollars. So net export is really the net demand for dollars. Initially, the government budget is balanced and the trade is balanced. Suppose the government runs a deficit. This one is the same as what we talked about before. First is the real interest rate in the domestic market, the loanable funds market, and the real interest rate. Original saving and investment demand curve. Saving equals to y minus t minus c plus t minus g. If there is a budget deficit, which means t minus g is going to decrease. So S is going to decrease as well. Budget deficit means G is bigger, so S is going to shift to the left-hand side. So R increase. The real interest rate will influence the net capital outflow. Because if the real interest rate in the United States is higher, which means all the assets in the United States are more attractive comparative to the other assets in foreign countries. So for United States residents, of course, you want to invest it in more in the United States instead of others. So that's the original capital outflow here, NCO1, and that's the new net capital, NCO2, because you want to invest in the United States more. So, which means the net capital outflow will decrease. So R rises and NCO falls. How does this budget deficit affect the US real exchange rate? Remember, the NCO is the supply of foreign currency exchange market. So, which means the supply is going to decrease. That's the original supply NCO1, and that's the new supply curve NCO2. Since it decreased, the supply curve are going to shift to the left-hand side. We can see that the interest rate will increase about the budget deficit reduce NCO and the supply of dollars, the real exchange rate appreciate. Because the net export doesn't change. A decrease in supply curve, the decrease of NCO, that will increase the real exchange rate and reducing the net export. When the real exchange rate appreciates, which means the dollars will appreciate, which means the dollars are more expensive than before. And the US goods are more expensive than before. So foreigners are going to buy a smaller amount of US goods and services than before. US exports decrease and the net exports will also decrease. So the NX will decrease. Since NX equals to 0 initially, the budget deficit causes a trade deficit. NX smaller than 0. So we can see from this diagram the twin deficits from 1960 to 2019. So the relationship between the US federal deficit and the US net export. From the last example question, we know that if the budget deficit increase, that will decrease the net export. So we can see there is a negative relationship between the budget deficit and the net export. It's not a perfect negative relationship because there are many other factors will affect the trade deficit, the NX. Except the budget deficit, there are also other factors will affect the net export. But anyway, there is a negative relationship between these two, the budget deficit and the net export. The effect of budget deficit, first of all, it will influence the national saving because T minus G decrease. So the national saving decrease. If supply curve, that's in the loanable funds market. If S decrease, that will increase R. If R increase in the R and the NCO market, R increase, then the NCO decrease. NCO decrease, that will influence the E and the dollars. That's the supply and demand curve, NX, NCO. If NCO decrease, that will influence the real exchange rate. If the real exchange rate, the US dollars appreciate, then the net export will decrease. That's the logic of the budget deficit. Well, other effects of the budget deficit, as the foreigners acquire more domestic assets, the country's debt to the rest of the world increase. So due to many years of budget and trade deficit, the US is now the world's largest debtor nation. The international investment position of the US, that's the data in September 30th in 2019. So the value of US owned foreign assets, that's the value of foreign owned of US assets because of NCO equals to purchases of foreign assets by domestic residents minus the purchases of the domestic assets by foreigners. So that's the net debt to the rest of the world. Oh, this is the net NCO. This is a negative number. Because the value of foreign owned US asset, this is bigger. And the US citizens owned foreign asset is smaller. So the NCO is smaller than zero. And that's a huge amount of dollars. Which means the net capital outflow for the United States is negative. The connection between R and E, we already investigated that before. Anything that increases R, such as the budget deficit, will reduce the NCO because the foreign asset is not attractive anymore comparative to the domestic assets. So the net capital outflow will decrease, which means the supply of the US dollars will decrease. The supply curve is going to shift to the left-hand side. Results, a real exchange rate appreciates. Keep in mind that the loanable funds market determines the real interest rate. That determines loanable funds market. Demand, that's the investment. And the supply is saving. That determines the real interest rate R. And this R determines the NCO, the net capital outflow, shown in the upper graph here. And this NCO, the net capital outflow, is the supply curve of the US dollars to the exchange rate market outside of the United States. That NCO determines the supply of dollars in foreign exchange market, the lower graph here. The effects of investment incentives. Untaxed incentive for investment has similar effects as budget deficit. Why? Again, the real interest rate decided by the loanable funds market, supply and the demand curve, and tax incentive for investment, which means for domestic market, people are going to invest it more because there is an incentive. So demand curve is going to shift to the right side. It will cause an increase in interest rate. And the R rises, NCO falls. which is the same as the budget deficit, right? That will cause an increase in R, decrease NCO, the decrease of supply curve will cause R rises and the NX falls. But one important difference is investment tax incentive increase in investment because in this one, the loanable funds market increase compared with before. And that will increase investment, which will increase productivity growth and the living standards in the long run. But for the budget deficit, reduce investment, because for budget deficit, the supply curve are going to shift to the left-hand side, which will cause a rising R, but also a decreasing of loanable funds. That will reduce the productivity growth and the living standard. Invest more, which means productivity or K or Y divided by L is going to increase. Invested less is going to Y divided by L is going to decrease. Because I is also K. Trade policy. Government policy that directly influence the quantity of goods and services of a country imports or exports. Two things that the government can decide, can use to influence the trade. The first is tariff, a tax on imported goods from other countries, or the import quota, limit the quantity of imports. So there are some arguments for restricting trade. The first is saving jobs in domestic industry. The other is reduce the trade deficit. That's the reason why the government wants to enact these two policies. The government's goal is to save jobs in domestic industry or reduce the trade deficit from the tariffs or import quota. Think about the trade war between America and the United States during Trump's presidency term. What Trump wanted just decrease the trade deficit between China, right? And in that case, the US government increased the tariffs to decrease the trade deficit. In this chapter, we are going to take a look at if the tariff or import quota will reduce the trade deficit or save some jobs in domestic industry. Let's take a look at this example together. Suppose the government uses import quotas on cars imported from Japan in order to protect the jobs in domestic auto industry. Use the appropriate diagrams to determine how this policy would affect. So in this question, you need to use or draw three pictures on the blackboard here. There are loanable funds market, the real interest rate and NCO, and the foreign currency exchange rate here. So if there is an import quota or tariff, no matter which one, that will influence import, right? If there is a tariff or import quota, which means the government wants the US residents to import fewer products than before. That's the government aim. So if the import decrease, which means net export equals to export minus import. If import decrease, and then the net export will increase. If net export increase, it will not influence the domestic market. It will not influence the I, NCO, or R. So this doesn't change. The only thing change is this net export here. So for solution A and B, import quota doesn't affect saving or investment. So it doesn't affect NCO, which means these two charts doesn't change. from the government's policy. For C, what's the real exchange rate? E will change because the net export change, right? So it will change the market for foreign currency exchange. Since R will determine the NCO. If R doesn't change, NCO doesn't change, and only NX change. The D supply curve shift at each exchange rate. Imports of car falls, which means the net exports rise. So D shifted to the right hand side, because D is the net export, right? And the net export increase. So D demand curve should also increase, which is going to shift to the right hand side. With the fixed amount of E exchange rate, the the US citizens will export more product and import fewer product. So the net exports for United States will go up. So D is going to shift to the right hand side. At E1, there is excess demand in the foreign currency market. Because again, since R doesn't change, the NCO, the supply of the US dollars doesn't change. If the demand increase, but the supply of dollars doesn't increase, it's fixed amount because it's a vertical line, which means the demand is bigger than the supply. Then the value of dollars is going to increase, right? Value of dollars, which is the exchange rate, will increase. So E will increase because supply is smaller than the demand. The value of dollar will increase. That's the exchange rate. So E will increase. If E increase, then the net exports will shift back. Or the point will go back. If the E increase, which means the US dollars is more expensive than before, the US goods are more expensive. Then for foreign countries, they do not want to import some goods from the United States, which refer to the United States. It cannot export as enough as goods as before, because the US dollars are more expensive than before. Because if foreign currency exchange market, the supply of dollars doesn't change, but demand for dollars increase. The exchange rate increase here. The equilibrium point will increase from this point to that point. So again, this is a new equilibrium, which again is NCO equals to NX. NCO will always equal to NX, right? So that's the new equilibrium. So E rises to restore equilibrium. That's the new equilibrium. The net exports will go back to the previous level because the export will decrease because of the higher interest exchange rate. So does the policy save the US jobs? Well, at the beginning, if E could remain at E1, the net export would rise because the import decreased. But the import quota doesn't affect the NCO, so the quantity of dollars supply is fixed. Since NX must equal to NCO, E must rise enough to keep NX at its original level. As a result, the policy of restricting imports doesn't reduce the trade deficit. First of all, the import decreased, and more goods may be produced from the domestic countries for US citizens. But since the real exchange rate increased, there are fewer foreigners who want to buy the product from the United States. Then for the United States, the export suppliers are going to lose their orders or whatever, and they are going to fire laborers. So the total employment will not change. The US consumers buy more US autos. US automakers hire more workers to produce these actual cars. So the policy saves the jobs in the United States auto industry. But when US is reducing foreign demand for US exports, export industrial contract exporting firms lay off workers. So the import quotas save jobs in auto industry, but destroy jobs in the United States industry. This is what we learned. At the beginning, we asked the government's goal of by tariffs or import quota is to save jobs and decrease the trade deficit. But we can see that for trade deficit, it will not decrease. Because when the import decrease, the exports will also decrease because of E increase. And for the second aim, to increase the domestic employment rate, but again, it doesn't work. Because the import quota saves the jobs in auto industry, but destroyed the jobs in US export industries. So which means if the government want to have the tariffs or want to imply the import quotas, it will not complete their goals, so finish or give what they want. All right, so that's what we can learn from these three figures. The last material in this chapter is the political instability and capital flight. In 1994, political instability in Mexico made world financial markets nervous. So people worried about the safety of Mexican assets they own. People sold many of these assets, pulled their capital out of Mexico. When the political instability happens, no matter in which countries, and then no matter foreigners invested in that countries or domestic residents invested in their countries, often they do not want to invest anymore because of the unstable political. So they want to withdraw their assets and invest in other areas. So that's what happens when some country has political instability. And definition for capital flight is the large and sudden reduction in the demand for assets located in a country. As foreign investors sell their assets and pull out their capital, the NCO increased at each value of R. Again, because people, no matter residents or foreigners, do not have confidence in that country, so often are going to pull out their capital outside from that country. In this case, it's Mexico. So the net capital outflow here. This market is not in the United States anymore, not US. It's in Mexico, but in this loanable funds market and net capital outflow, this from the perspective of Mexico. So it's not the United States we learned before. Since Mexico has instability or political instability, so no matter residents or foreigners, they are going to pull out their capitals and invest in other countries. So NCO will move to the right-hand side. And remember, the demand curve equals to I plus NCO. If NCO go up, then the demand curve will also shift to the right-hand side. demand for loanable funds equal to I plus NCO. I increase the NCO, increase the demand of loanable funds. So demand curve in loanable funds market in Mexico is going to shift to the right hand side. So the equilibrium value of R, the real interest rate, and the NCO both increase. That's the new intersection. And also the R increase, the NCO also increase. So this amount is the capital flight. Even though the interest rate in Mexico increased, the asset, maybe the returns is higher relative to other countries. But because of the political instability, nobody have confidence in that country. So even though the interest rate is higher, still a huge amount of capital is going to flow out from Mexico. So in the capital flight, the first thing change is NCO. That will change. This case is different from what we learned before. What we learned is our interest rate is going to determine the NCO. But when we talk about the capital flight, because of political instability, the NCO will change first. And the NCO that's change first, and that will influence the demand curve. Demand curve is going to influence the interest rate, and that will tells you the exact amount of NCO. It's going to flow out of the Mexico. Again, this is the market in Mexico, not the US. And the market for foreign currency exchange, and again, here, since from the previous two graph, that's Mexico. So this one is not dollars anymore, it's pesos. And this is outside of Mexico. The foreign currency exchange market outside of Mexico. So, which means the supply curve is the NCO, which is pesos. The money, the pesos flow out from the Mexico, and the demand is the net export. Still, this refer to the Mexico. That's the demand curve and supply curve. I increase the NCO because we learned before, right? So the NCO, the net capital outflow, will increase because of the political instability, because I increase the supply of pesos in foreign exchange market. This is outside of Mexico. If the supply is higher, which means the value of pesos is not as value as before, and then the exchange rate is going to decrease because the supply is bigger than the demand. If the real exchange rate of pesos falls, which means just the exchange rate will fall for the pesos. So this is the example of capital flight and in Mexico. This is the exchange rate of pesos. You can see after 1994, the exchange rate for pesos decreased by a huge amount, like almost 50%, just because of the political instability. Because of this, the NCO go up, and that will cause E decrease. That's it. That's the last material in this chapter. I think the material in this chapter is a little bit complicated, so you really need to understand the logic behind them. You need to distinguish the different markets, such as this market that belongs to the US, and that market belongs to the other countries, the foreign currency, something like that, and what will determine what. Like what curve will move the first because all three diagrams are connects with each other. So if one thing change, that will influence the other elements change. So that's the reason why I think this chapter is a little bit complicated.